The pen felt lighter than I expected when I signed my name on the last page. Margaret, the branch manager at RBC, slid the folder across the desk and smiled the way people do when they've just helped you do something that changes your life. "Congratulations, Mr. Callahan," she said. "Everything is in order." I shook her hand, walked out into the September air, and stood on the sidewalk in front of the bank in Guelph, Ontario, watching the maple trees drop their first leaves of the season. 64 years old. 38 years working as a civil engineer for the region of Waterloo. A pension that covered my modest needs. A paid-off house on Courtright Road. And now, for the first time in my adult life, a plan that was entirely, completely mine. I had just finished setting up my living trust. Nobody knew about it. Not my son, not his wife. Not even my daughter, though she would have supported it. It was mine. And I had learned, in the past 2 years, that some things need to stay yours until the moment arrives when it matters most. I drove home that afternoon with the windows down, thinking about Eleanor. My wife had passed 3 years earlier, in October, just as the leaves were turning. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. We had 40 years together, good years, honest years. She used to say that we built our life the way you build a house in Canada. Slowly, carefully, with one eye always on the weather. We were careful people. We saved. We didn't spend on things we didn't need. We paid off the mortgage early. We put both kids through university, without a dollar of student debt. After she died, I rattled around in the house for 6 months, not sure what to do with myself. My son, Derek, came by every Sunday for dinner at first. My daughter, Patricia, called from Vancouver every few days. I was grieving, but I was managing. I had my garden, my woodworking shop in the garage, my Tuesday morning coffee group at the Tim Hortons on Stone Road, with 3 other retired men I'd known for 20 years. Then Derek got promoted to regional director at his company, and everything quietly began to shift. The Sunday dinners became every other Sunday, then once a month. I understood he was busy. He had his own life, but his wife, Sandra, started coming along when he did visit, and something in the way she looked around my house began to make me uneasy. It was a particular kind of looking, the way a person examines something they're already mentally rearranging. Sandra was not a bad person, I told myself. She was ambitious. She wanted things for their family. I understood that. But there was a version of wanting things that respects what belongs to others, and a version that doesn't. By the 2nd year after Eleanor died, the suggestion started. "Dad, have you thought about downsizing? This house is a lot to maintain on your own." "Dad, Patricia is all the way in Vancouver. You'd be closer to us if you moved into something smaller, nearby." "Dad, Sandra's parents are in a beautiful retirement community in Kitchener. Very independent. You'd love it." I listened. I nodded. I said I'd think about it. I was thinking about it. Just not in the way they meant. What I was actually thinking about was my retirement plan. My real one. The one Eleanor and I had sketched out on a notepad at the kitchen table, back when we were both still healthy and optimistic about the future. We had talked about buying an RV and spending a year driving across Canada. Not a trailer, a proper Class A motorhome. Start in Ontario. Head west through the prairies. Reach the Rockies. Drive all the way to Vancouver Island to visit Patricia. Maybe cross into the American Southwest the following winter. We had a whole list of places. Banff, Tofino, Cape Breton, the Cabot Trail in fall. Eleanor didn't make it to that trip, but I decided I still would. I spent most of that second winter researching. I visited dealerships in Guelph and Cambridge and Kitchener. I test drove 3 different models. I read forums and watched YouTube channels and joined an online community of Canadian RV retirees. I settled on a Thor Palazzo, a beautiful, solid 3.3-footer with a queen bed in the back, a full kitchen, and enough storage for everything I needed. I found a 1-year-old model at a dealership in Brantford, well-maintained, priced at $186,000. With my savings and a partial RRSP withdrawal, I could pay cash. I did not tell Derek. I'm not sure exactly when I decided not to tell him. It wasn't one moment. It was a slow accumulation of small things, a comment here, a look there, The afternoon he sat at my kitchen table and mentioned, casually, that he and Sandra had been speaking to a financial advisor about long-term planning for the family. When I asked what that meant, he said something vague about making sure assets were protected and managed properly as I got older. "I'm 63, I said. "I have a pension, no debt, and I just had a full physical. My doctor says I'm in excellent health." Derek nodded in the patient, careful way you nod at someone you've already decided isn't quite capable of understanding. That night I called my own lawyer, a man named Robert Chen, whom I'd used for our wills years ago. I told him what I'd been observing. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "James, let's talk about a revocable living trust and a durable power of attorney, and let's make sure they're structured exactly the way you want them, while you're clearly competent to do so." We met 4 times over 2 months. By September, everything was in place. The house, my savings, my pension beneficiary designations. The RV I hadn't yet bought, all of it organized, documented, and protected. Robert had also helped me understand my rights under Ontario law. Nobody, not a son, not a daughter-in-law, not anyone could apply for guardianship over a competent adult without a serious legal fight that they would not easily win. I bought the motorhome on a Tuesday in October. It was the anniversary of Eleanor's death, and I thought she would have appreciated the timing. I drove it back to Guelph myself, parked it on the pad beside my garage that I'd quietly had poured the previous spring, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, looking at my street through the big windshield. The maple in the front yard was full red. The neighbor's dog was barking at something. My life felt, for the first time in 3 years, like it had a direction again. I did not tell Derek. He found out on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks later, when he and Sandra pulled into my driveway for what I thought was a routine visit. I was in the garden raking leaves when their Audi came around the corner. I watched Sandra get out of the car and stop when she saw the motorhome. She stood very still for a moment. Then she turned to Derek and said something I couldn't hear. They walked over to me together. "Dad," Derek said. "What is that?" "A Thor Palazzo," I said. 2023, one owner. I bought it last month. The silence that followed was the particular kind that comes before a conversation someone has rehearsed. "Dad," Sandra said, her voice gentle in the way that is not actually gentle. "We're worried about you. This is a lot of money. How much did you spend?" "Enough," I said, and went back to my raking. What followed over the next hour was one of the more painful conversations of my adult life. Not because it was angry, it was mostly the opposite of angry, which was somehow worse. Derek spoke quietly and carefully about cognitive changes that happen naturally as people age. Sandra mentioned her parents' retirement community again, how much her father had blossomed there. They talked about the house being too much, and the motorhome being impractical, and the winters being dangerous for solo travel. I listened to all of it. I had learned by then that listening is not the same as agreeing. When they finished, I said, "I appreciate your concern. I'm not going anywhere today. We can talk more at Christmas." They seemed satisfied by this. They stayed for lunch. Sandra walked around the motorhome and looked in the windows. When they left, Derek hugged me at the door and held on a beat too long. I called Robert Chen that evening and told him what had happened. "Keep a log," he said. "Dates, what was said, who was present, and call me if anything changes." Things changed in February. I came back from my Tuesday coffee group to find Derek's Audi in my driveway. He was alone. He was waiting on the front step, which he had not done since he was a teenager. He had a file folder in his hands. "Dad," he said, "can we talk inside?" We sat at the kitchen table. He opened the folder. Inside was a document from a law firm in Kitchener, and a letter from a doctor I had never heard of, and a form that I recognized. It was a Form 1, a psychiatric assessment form used in Ontario to assess capacity. "Sandra and I have been talking to a lawyer," Derek said. "We think it might be time to apply for guardianship." "It's not, Dad. It's not a bad thing. It just means someone can help you manage things properly. The motorhome, the house, the finances. We'd be the guardians. We'd take care of everything." I looked at the document for a long time. I looked at my son across the table. "Did you drive to Guelph from Mississauga on a Tuesday morning to bring me this?" I asked. "We're worried, Dad." "You haven't mentioned your sister," I said. Does Patricia know about this? Something shifted in his face. We were going to talk to her. Were you? I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. I'd like you to leave now, Derek. Dad, I'm not angry, I said, which was not entirely true. But I'd like you to leave. After he left, I sat at the table for a long time. Then I called Patricia in Vancouver. She answered on the second ring. And when I told her what had happened, she was quiet for a moment and then said, very clearly, Dad, I'm booking a flight. She arrived Thursday. I picked her up at Pearson and we drove back to Guelph and I made dinner, and we talked until midnight. She was furious, the specific fury of someone who has been excluded from a family decision that directly concerned her. She called Derek that night from my living room, and I went to the kitchen and didn't listen. But I could hear the tone. The next morning, I took Patricia to Robert Chen's office. We sat across from Robert and he explained what I had put in place. The living trust. The power of attorney, which named Patricia as my agent, not Derek. The documentation of my capacity. The records from my physician. The log I had been keeping. Patricia looked at the folder Robert handed her and looked at me. You did all of this already, she said. I did all of this already, I said. Robert explained what would happen if Derek proceeded with a guardianship application. He would need to prove, in front of a judge of the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, that I was incapable of managing my own affairs. He would need medical evidence, which he did not have. My physician had already provided a letter confirming my full cognitive and physical capacity. He would face a formal capacity assessment conducted by an independent assessor, not a doctor selected by him. He would face me, represented by counsel, with 2 years of documented evidence that I was entirely competent. He would almost certainly lose, and the legal costs would be significant. What if he still files? Patricia asked. He can file, Robert said. People are allowed to file applications that don't succeed. We drove home in the late afternoon light. The fields along Highway 6 were flat and white with February snow. Patricia was quiet for most of the drive. Did you know he was going to do this? She asked finally. I suspected something was coming, I said. I didn't know exactly what. The motorhome, she said. That was never really about a motorhome. No, I said. It wasn't. What it was about, we both understood, was the house. A detached home on Courtright Road in Guelph, purchased in 1989 for $187,000, now worth somewhere between $850,000 and $900,000. It was, in Sandra's vision of the future, an asset that belonged to the next generation. My spending my RRSP withdrawal, my cash purchase of the motorhome, my refusal to move into a retirement community was, in that vision, a kind of theft. I was spending what should eventually be theirs. I had thought about this a great deal, about what we owe our children and what we don't, about the difference between leaving something behind as a gift and having it taken early as an assumption. Eleanor and I had worked for everything we had. We had lived carefully and given generously, and put 2 children through school and never asked for anything in return. The idea that our savings existed primarily to be inherited, that my retirement plans were an inconvenience, an obstacle, made something in me go very quiet and very firm. I did not call Derek. I let the lawyers communicate. Robert sent a letter to the Kitchener firm, advising them of the existing trust, the power of attorney designating Patricia, and my physician's letter confirming capacity. He attached a summary of what a contested guardianship application would involve, including an itemized estimate of legal costs. He noted that any application proceeding without merit could result in a request for costs against the applicant. I did not hear from Derek for 6 weeks. Patricia flew back to Vancouver but called every few days. In March, I had the motorhome serviced, loaded it with the things I'd been accumulating: maps, a camp chair, fishing gear, a small library of books about the places I planned to see. I scheduled my first trip for May, a loop through northern Ontario to Sault Ste. Marie, then along Lake Superior, ending in Thunder Bay. In April, Derek called. Not Sandra. Derek. Dad, he said. Can I come up? Just me? He arrived on a Saturday morning, parked in the driveway, and stood beside the motorhome for a moment before knocking. When I let him in, he sat at the kitchen table and folded his hands and looked at them. I'm sorry, he said. I waited. I let us convince ourselves that we were doing the right thing, that we were protecting you. He paused. I think we were protecting ourselves. I had known my son for 34 years. I knew the sound of his genuine voice versus his managed voice. And this was his genuine voice. It didn't erase what had happened, but it was the beginning of something, which was better than nothing. You're not getting the house, I said. Not early. Whatever's left when I'm gone will go where I've arranged for it to go. And that arrangement is already made and already legal. You don't have any say in it. He nodded. He hadn't expected anything different. But you're my son, I said. That doesn't stop. We had lunch. He asked about the motorhome, and I showed him around the interior, the storage, the kitchen, the way the bed folded out. I showed him the route I had planned on the map. He looked at it for a long time. Mom would have loved this, he said. She would have been a terrible co-pilot, I said. She couldn't read a map to save her life. He laughed. It was the first time in a long time I'd heard him really laugh, without the careful, managed quality that had crept into everything. I left for Northern Ontario in the 3rd week of May, on a Tuesday, the same morning as my coffee group. I told the boys I'd see them in September. Frank, who had done a similar trip 10 years earlier, gave me a list of campgrounds along Superior. Doug said I was out of my mind and that the black flies in June would carry me off. Ted, who has never gone anywhere farther than his fishing camp in Muskoka, just raised his coffee cup. The morning I pulled out of the driveway, I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The maple in the front yard was just beginning to leaf out, that pale, new green that only comes in spring. I thought of Eleanor. I thought of the notepad on the kitchen table and the list we made together. I thought of Robert Chen's office and the folder and the morning I signed my name at the bottom of the last page. Then I started the engine, and I drove. It took me 11 days to reach Thunder Bay. I camped at Pancake Bay Provincial Park along Lake Superior, where the lake was so clear and cold and enormous that standing at the water's edge felt like standing at the edge of something much larger than geography. I hiked the coastal trail. I ate fresh lake trout at a roadside spot outside Wawa that had no website and no reviews, and was the best meal I'd had in years. I watched the sun go down over the water and took out my phone and took a photograph and then put the phone away. Because some things don't need to be documented. They just need to be lived. Patricia met me in Thunder Bay. She had taken a week off work and flown in from Vancouver, and we spent 4 days driving back along the south shore of Superior together. Stopping when we wanted, eating when we were hungry, talking the way you can only talk when you're moving through a landscape that has no agenda. She told me about a man she'd been seeing in Vancouver, a landscape architect named Tom. I told her about the conversation with Derek in April. She listened to that part carefully. Do you think he means it? She asked. I think he was genuinely ashamed, I said. Whether that lasts depends on whether Sandra decides it does. Patricia nodded. She knew her brother. And if it doesn't last, then Robert Chen has everything in order, I said. And whatever happens will be handled the way I've arranged for it to be handled. She was quiet for a while, watching the lake slide past the passenger window. You really did plan all of this, didn't you? She said. Not a question. Your mother and I planned our whole lives, I said. I just had to figure out how to keep doing it without her. We drove the rest of the way to Sudbury mostly in comfortable silence. The kind that only comes between people who have known each other long enough to have run out of things to perform and gotten to the actual thing underneath. She flew home from Sudbury. I drove the rest of the way back to Guelph alone. Arriving on a Sunday evening in June, the lights still in the sky at 9 o'clock the way it is in Ontario in summer. Long and golden and generous. I parked on the pad beside the garage. I went inside and made tea and sat at the kitchen table, where Derek had sat with his folder in February, and where Eleanor and I had made our list on a notepad years before, and where I had made the same dinner for the same family for 30 years. The folder from Robert's office was in the drawer beside the refrigerator, where I had put it the day I came home from his office in September. I didn't need to look at it. I knew what it contained, but I knew it was there. The summer went on. I made improvements to the motorhome, a better awning, a backup camera upgrade, a small portable generator for nights in spots without hookups. I started planning the next trip. East, in September, along the street, Lawrence to the Gaspésie, down into New Brunswick, then up to Cape Breton for the Cabot Trail in fall color. That had been on the list too. Derek called in July. We talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things, his work, a trip he and Sandra were taking to Portugal, a problem with his car. It was the most normal conversation we'd had in 2 years. I did not bring up the folder. He did not bring up the motorhome. Some things that have been said don't need to be said again. They just need to be understood. I am 64 years old. I have a pension, and a paid-off house, and a motorhome, and a route planned, and a daughter who calls on Sundays, and a son who is finding his way back. I have a lawyer who has organized everything I own into a structure that reflects exactly what I want to happen with it. I have my life, organized on my own terms, protected by my own planning, going in the direction I choose. I have that. And in September, when the leaves turn, and the mornings go cool, and the highway north of Kingston empties out, and the street Lawrence comes into view wide and silver in the early light, I will start the engine and go.